When time passes, you kind of forget how powerful the moments you experience are. Those instances we take in sort of fade away, and it's only experiencing them again that brings us back around. In the form of media, we do this by replaying, rewatching, and revisiting the stories that made us feel alive in the first place. This video is sort of impromptu, as I'm making this on account of rewatching Breaking Bad for the third time now, showing it to a friend of mine for the first. And I guess why I stick around watching has to do with all the layers that Breaking Bad brings. And once you know what happens, it's kind of hard to see it the way you did when you first watched. Breaking Bad for me was my introduction to dramatic television in early 2017, making me just 13 years old. It had changed the way I had thought about characters, and really it had replaced the word characters with people, because that's what Breaking Bad did. It embraced the gray area in its individuals, and made every member of this well-oiled machine feel both hated and loved, yet understood. This show had reminded me more of my own life than any other TV I had seen prior. That was a feat in itself, but in my teenage naivete, I distinctly remember Breaking Bad having an odd effect on me that didn't occur in any other show. I found myself always on the side of who I now know to be as the monster role, Walter White. This was time and time again, through thick and thin. Everything he did, from the pilot to his last moments on Earth, I had summed up to be as necessary and courageous. That everything Walter did was done in order to survive in the face of a greater threat, and that was enough for me to defend his grave with honor. In addition to the Breaking Bad scenes in the final season of Better Call Saul, I've noticed a grand shift in my opinion on the character. As a kid, I'd hoped I could see what was wrong with profuse lying, absurd manipulation, and overbearing hubris. Watching every scene with Walter now, I am utterly irked by his presence, and the further I get in the show, the more shocked I am when he says things that I can't fathom any human being would say to another. The atmosphere Walt brought about was the very antithesis of heroic, and I can now say with certainty that I hate his actions, and I hate him for what he's done to the people around him. And that's not a hard thing for me to say, but it really was back when I was much younger. And I think, well, why did I even see a world where Walter could be the hero? What was going on in my 13-year-old mind? By season 5, even after Walter had lied and manipulated countless times, blown up a nursing home, and even poisoned a child, a part of me was always dying on that hill of Walter White. There's a lot of detail that plays into this, both in the choices made to Walter's character and in the social climate in which we expect things of people from certain demographics. I think it is fair to say, in an unfair media environment, we allow male characters to get away with more, and further scrutinize female characters when they are seemingly acting out of line. It's just the way it is. Notice how Walt never owns an outright personal trait that we can all detest right off the bat. Walter never hits his wife or supports adultery, but Skyler does. And because infidelity leaves such a sour taste in the mouth just by the mention of it, a lot of watchers will defend Walt because of something so undeniably unlikable in Skyler's behavior. Skyler will always be at the disadvantage of Walt because she is a woman, and Walt can get away with his behavior at a much higher tolerance than Skyler because of the advantage of his position as a man. When Walt gives his knocking speech, I used to think it was the coolest thing in the world, but Vince even says it himself. He's just bullying his wife. He doesn't know how to read the room, and doesn't understand that no one talks like that, especially to your wife. It makes for a great scene, but it doesn't yield support for one character or another. It simply means that we are in a situation that is not ideal, and a distraught spouse is reacting and learning how to handle a very toxic situation. Jump forward to the Ozymandias kitchen scene, and it reflects the same message, but convinces a much greater audience because it is so extreme, showing a toxic situation turned hostile. Again, that advantage Walter has will always give him the edge, and so for Walter to lose the support of the audience, he must do more than brush against evil. And he does, time and time again. This thinking is more subconscious than it is intentional. And while the perception of the audience is a fairly uncontrollable factor, Vince Gilligan and the rest of the writers do a good job in the managing of Walter's actions in what they can control. Just like in any other television, we feel entitled to make our own opinions about our subjects, because we know everything about them. And even if they are real jerks, we don't want to necessarily hear it from anyone else. Let me give an example. My friend Luke has been a real jerk these past few weeks. He's just lost his job and broke up with his girlfriend of 5 years. We were at this party the other night trying to blow off steam, and he started insulting this girl for the way she dressed. I think it might have reminded him of his girlfriend. Well, his ex-girlfriend. Now, when someone calls out his behavior at the party, things turn up even hotter, and the people at the party want to kick Luke out, maybe even call the cops. Because Luke is my friend, I know he has in him what it takes to be a good person, to make the right call, and I know what he's going through. And when these strangers come and try to punish Luke without knowing him, they lose me in their argument. I can call Luke out for being a real jerk. I have that right. But the second someone who doesn't know what Luke is going through attacks him, now we have a problem. Do you see what I'm saying? To a much broader extent, we as the audience are watching our good friend Walter become someone we don't recognize. But because we've known him since a point where we could empathize with him, we feel the right to defend from a place in our hearts that stems from the past. And anyone who comes at Walter for reasons in which they lack all the information, well, they fall short, and we stick with Walter. This is how I thought, albeit a much greater situation, but this is how I thought. Back on my first watch, towards the latter half of Season 5, I would criticize the demeanor of Hank and Marie once the truth had come out and they found out the identity of Heisenberg. This was really the only criticism I had of the show. I would call their attitude flat, lacking that gray area of internal conflict that I had grown to love from the show. They hated Walt for what he had done, and maybe except for in the final seconds of Hank's life, they showed zero regret or remorse or understanding. It was catch Walter or nothing else. And this had not sit right with me. Because while they hated Walt for the same reasons we all knew, they didn't know the full story. They couldn't make that call. And I would think they would at least try and understand. In the Season 5 episode Buried, when Skylar and Hank meet up to discuss the conviction of Walter, Hank calls Walt a liar because he might have been lying that his cancer was back. And Hank was right. Walt was a liar. He had lied about killing Mike, about poisoning Brock, but he had not lied about his cancer. And so when Skylar is on the opposite end of that conversation, we understand her frustration of a mother who just wants her children back. And we want Hank to listen and to understand as well. Watching back then, I didn't believe in a line that could be crossed, not just in Breaking Bad, but in the way I viewed life. I believed that no matter what you did, if you could feel remorse, well, there was more to the story. There was something to defend. Watching now, I see Hank and Marie, Skylar and Jesse may not see as deep into Walter as the eye of the watcher. But the tool of omniscience doesn't offer any consolation. It just brings the audience to a detailed comprehension. And I think what I was tripping myself up on during my first watch had to do with the misunderstanding and being understood. In the lives of these people, we see their faults, but understand where they are coming from. That's just good writing. But being able to understand doesn't distance them any less from the actions they've committed. Walter is no doubt a delusional monster, who only has the last word because of his uncontrollable ego. And that's that. Walter may feel regret and remorse, and yes, that makes him human, but his actions, both selfish and deluded, have made him a monster. These two ideas aren't mutually exclusive, and that is the biggest takeaway I have gathered during my time on this show. After I finish Breaking Bad for the third time, I don't know how long it'll be until I watch the show again. Not because it's a mundane watch, far from it, but because I'm afraid of how I will feel when I finish. Vince Gilligan has created something untouchable, and I'm worried of straining my enjoyment of the show and my initial experience with it. Walter White is one of the greatest protagonists to ever touch the screen, and I don't want to look too deep into the magic so that it's not magical anymore. When time passes, you kind of forget how powerful the moments you experience are. The moments we take in sort of fade away, and we become desensitized. Experiencing those things again only brings us halfway there, and it is never the same feeling as it was in the beginning. But it will give us insight on who we are, who we've become, and who we will strive to be.